Oh, yes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Nicole. I'm on the events team here at Books and Magic. We are so excited to have Oyinkan, Braithwaite, and Lovia Gyarkye here with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Cursed Daughters. Well, before we get started, I want to point out some logistics for how tonight's event is going to go. If you need to use the restroom at any point, the door is located next to that moleskin spinner right behind you. We'll be doing a hand raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so start thinking of your questions now and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Oyinka will be signing and personalizing books at the next to the table where you checked in, so we'll let you know when and where to line up for that. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Cursed Daughters online using the link in the live stream description. Cursed Daughters is a brilliant cocktail of modernity and superstition, vibrant humor, and hard-won wisdom, romantic love, and familial obligation. With its unforgettable cast of characters, it asks us what it means to be given a second chance and how to live both wisely and well with what we've been given. It was also recently picked for Jenna Bush's book club, Read with Jenna. Monica Braithwaite is the author of My Sister the Serial Killer, which we have her purchase at the front today. She was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and was raised there and in the UK. She currently lives in London with her family. As I mentioned earlier, Lovia Gyarkye joins Anika in conversation tonight. Lovia is the editor at Hammer and Hope, a magazine of Black politics and culture. Previously, she was a film critic at the Hollywood Reporter and an editor at the New York Times Magazine. She teaches in the Arts and Culture program at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming our two.
Thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Say bye. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight with Oyen, who I so peer pressured, right? Peer pressured into reading a passage because Cursed Daughters is just so beautiful, and I think it would be a shame to not hear the prose and
Wait, should I go ahead and do it now?
yeah.
Okay.
Let's start.
All
Let's
right.
just.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Okay, let's see if I can read and hold at the same time. All right, I'm going to be reading from the prologue. She was a mermaid, queen of song and sea, goddess of the gill-bearing vertebrates, mistress of the hearts of men. Only she quickly realized that in these waters, the one creature that could flourish was Mami Water, and Mami Water was as far from the fabled mermaid as a creature could be. There was no shimmering fin, no haunting singing voice, no glossy skin. Instead, a mouth crowded with dagger teeth, hands that were deformed and decaying, features that were hard to look at but impossible to turn away from. Munifa had had little interest in Mami Water, but in the end, when they found her body, she would be likened to the airy creature. The water was cold and terrifying in the darkness. She was alone because Elegushi Beach was not a place you went to at night. In the blackness, the beach had a completely different atmosphere. Without the DJ blasting music or kids kicking up sand, it was joyless. Even in the daytime, most Lagosians stayed well away from the water. They were always surprised and a little awed when Munife wandered into the frothy waves in some skimpy bikini, with her arms held wide open and her braids flying wildly behind her. Strangers would call her back, afraid for her safety, afraid to be witness to some tragedy they imagined was about to take place. But she had always, always returned to shore. The tragedy was here, now, with her wading into the cold, thrashing waters. No, the tragedy had already happened, and this was simply the inevitable consequence. She thought of her mother, but the thought did not soften her resolve. She had left a brief note. She hadn't had the words. Besides, they would know why, and if they weren't sure, her cousin could enlighten them. She was doing her very best to think of anything but Golden Boy. She didn't want her last thoughts to be of him. She had already surrendered herself to him in her life. She didn't want to surrender to him at the end also. But she was neck deep now, and she hoped his heart would shatter into a million glittering, self-pitying pieces. He would swallow his pain whole, and perhaps he would choke on it. It was impossible to tell where her tears fell as the waves washed her clean. She was being swept further and further away from the shore, from her home, from her life. She was terrified, but she reminded herself that the worst had already happened. She only had to give in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was gorgeous. It's funny having read the entire thing to reread the prologue with you. Just I'm having so many thoughts that some of which will make it into this conversation. Others which you'll have to just buy the book to find out about. Um, so Cursed Daughters, it's this gorgeous novel about three Nigerian women who are wrestling with an ancient curse that's been cast upon their family. And I think my first question is just how did this novel come about? Like, when did you realize that you wanted to write this novel?
Okay, so I attempted to write this story um 2 years before I actually wrote it.
Mm.
And then, what I was interested in was this idea of reincarnation, like a coming of age story, but with the added layer of reincarnation and sort of having this character and watching her become a woman, but with the burden of the legacy and choices of a person she had never met. And that's the thing that interested me. So the curse hadn't even
Mm.
come into it yet. But I was really struggling with this version of the story. It was just one character at a time, first person POV, and I wasn't getting anywhere, which to be honest isn't so strange to me because I don't plot. So a lot of the time when I start a story, I dump it. Like it just joins the land of stories in my laptop, and I'm very gentle with myself. So I tell myself it's not time for that story yet,
Mm.
and one day I'll be mature enough, I'll be ready um tell it, to tell
Mhm.
that story. So as it would happen, 2 years from then, about 2 years, I think, my dad was staying with me, and he was harassing me about how long it had been since my sister, the serial killer. Um, and so I went back to my laptop, picked up a few stories that I had dumped, but I was still interested in, and I started to sort of narrate them to him. And when I
Mm.
came to what would become my system, what would become Cursed Daughters, all of a sudden I could see a way through where I
Mm.
hadn't been able to see one before. And yeah, and I realized it wasn't one character, it wasn't two, but it was going to be three.
Mhm.
And I knew who the three were, and all of a sudden the rest of it just started to come.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the three characters? And I'm also curious which of them spoke to you first.
So, I mean, when I first tried to write the story, it was Annie. She wasn't called Annie then, but
Okay.
it was Annie because she's the reincarnated character, or her family at least believes that she's reincarnated. So she came to me first. And then at some point, I tried to focus on her mother,
Mhm.
Ebu, who, is the one who gives birth to this child everybody thinks is a reincarnation,
Mhm.
and has to deal with that. But Monifa was always in the background because in order for you to be reincarnated,
Mhm.
you've reincarnated from someone. So even though I
Mhm.
hadn't thought about who um, she was always there.
Mhm.
So, coming to it again, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna, because it was always meant to be sort of a discovery of who Monifa was,
Mhm.
but all of, you know, coming to it again, I was like, I think I want to see Monifa's point of view and
Mhm.
how she sort of dealt with things as opposed to it all being reported.
Mhm.
And once I had decided that, even though she was the last character, she actually came to me, who she was came to me the easiest.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting because she's such a distinctive character, and her voice is so she's so abrasive in a lot of ways, which you'll find when you all buy the novel and read it. But she's such an incredibly compelling figure, so it kind of makes sense that she ended up being the person that came to you the easiest. Not to sound like your father,
Mm.
but you know, My Sister the Serial Killer did come out in 2018,
Yes.
which just factually was like nearly 7 years ago.
Yes.
But my question is not why did it take so long for some of us fans, but how you changed as a writer in that period, and if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
To be honest, I couldn't tell you how I
Mm.
changed because I've never, well, I don't know, I'm sure people will dig up stuff and say, actually, this is not true. But for the most part, I'll say this. My very first novel was a romance.
Mhm.
Someone did die, but it was a romance for all intents and purposes. my second novel was so by when I say this, they weren't published. I never sent them to an agent, but my second novel was epic fantasy. So none of those stories have been like each other, and that's where I'm comfortable. So I feel like every time I come to a novel, I've changed. Every time I'm interested in something else. I'm interested in a different style or um to sort of push myself and challenge myself in a different way. And that's what I kind of hope to continue to do. So I don't think of myself as like a literary writer or a crime writer or a fantasy writer. I feel like I'm just whatever the story needs me to do, I'll do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the healthiest relationship to writing in a way, right? Because oftentimes the genres and the categories are thrust upon us because they're the ways that people need to, categorize us.
Genre can be limiting, I think, from a reading perspective. It's cool because that lets I want to know what I'm getting into. But from a writing perspective, I think it can be, if you think too much about genre and the traditions of genre, I think it can be really limiting.
Yeah. I like to think in terms of themes, right? And so your first novel was about sisters who were, well, raise your hand if you've read the first novel. Don't be shy. Oh, hands. Okay. All right. Experts. They might fact check you. Sorry. Well, your first novel, was about sisters who are bound by secrets. And this novel is also about secrets, but you're meditating more in terms of like a family lineage, right? So it's not just this principal relationship between two sisters, but it's between mothers, it's between daughters, it's between grandmothers, etc. And I'm curious about what attracts you to that subject or those kinds of characters.
I think as for kinds of characters, I'm really interested in women with a little bit of crazy in them, just a tad. So that's all I'll say about that, because that's fascinating to me. I don't imagine. I feel like a lot of the time that's what I've been drawn to when I'm creating these women. Actually, I feel like my men tend to be a bit more traditional in the way that they think or the way that they move, but the women are just something a bit off about them, and that's I don't know, but I'll say this though. So I like to create characters that I think are very different from me. Otherwise, it's sort of, at least from my perspective, it sounds like I'm writing a diary, and that's not what I'm setting out to do. So I like them to be very different from who I am. But when my mom got around to reading My Sister the Serial Killer, there's this scene in My Sister Serial Killer where Ayla and Corday have just dumped a body into the lagoon, and Corday says, "At least he won't be lonely," sort of referring to the fact that they've done this before. And my mom's reaction to that was, "Oh my gosh, she sounds like you." So maybe I'm not as distant from these women as I think I am, but
Wow, you heard it here first.
but yeah, that's sort of what I'm interested in.
Yeah. I want to go back to this idea of women with a bit of crazy because I mean, I find those characters most compelling, right? There is something incredibly like attractive and alluring about a person, particularly a woman who's been, in all these ways subjugated by society, just being a little off. Um, and I'm wondering while you were writing this novel, or even as you were thinking about this novel, if you were reading other works or thinking about um, ideas or themes or stories or folklore that kind of reinforces that character fascination that you have.
No, I think when I do read, I try to read something that's very different from what I'm doing,
Really?
lest I I'm so afraid of it creeping in.
Mm.
So I'm very conscious of that. So generally, I won't read something that's anything like what I'm trying to do. I'm even sometimes I'll see a book and I'm like, that this sounds kind of like what I want to do, and I just cue it in for after I'm done.
Okay.
So there are actually a few books recently that I've come across. Gosh, I can't remember the names of them now, but I met one of the writers recently, and it was funny because I didn't know. She interviewed me actually, and she was about to tell me about her book, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I bought that!"
Yeah.
And I bought it because I was like, "This seems very like what there's some similar themes, but I'm going to read it after
Yeah.
I'm done, so I'll do that." So generally I don't, but life also provides you with so much material. There was a point where um, I was writing, um, I was mostly done with the writing process. I think it was in my editor's hands,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got two editors. One of them is here, Hailey. Um, but I've got two, and we were fairly far along in the process. Like
Yeah.
I really shouldn't have been adding anything else. But I had a conversation with my youngest sister,
Mm.
and we were talking about sort of this phenomenon of men leaving their wives when the wives are ill, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, women usually hang around and become the carers.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to include that.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to my UK editor and begged him that I know it's late, but I've got to slot this in.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. So yeah, basically I'm just saying that life just sort of provides its.
Yes. Whether that be
Mm.
autobiography or conversations with one's sister.
I don't like what you're implying
Oh,
here.
I'm not. There's no implication. I'm merely reflecting what you've already told us. um, I want to talk a little bit about the language in this novel, especially because you read from it. Because I found your first novel just like really compelling because of the acidity of the prose, right? Like it was kind of caustic, almost to the point of corrosiveness, and it was very terse and moved very quickly. I like read it all in one sitting, and I found myself really like obsessed with these characters, but also really afraid of them. And here, right? I mean, people are laughing because we're nervous. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was the last joke. That was the last joke. But in but in this novel, I feel like you indulge in a kind of more poetic, meditative prose, and I want to know how intentional that shift was, and if you could talk about maybe things in your life that it influenced it, if at all.
Um, See, I think the interesting thing about this process, like once you finish the book, people start to ask you questions about why you did certain things, and it's sometimes you have an answer, but I think like most of the time I'm like, I don't know, this is just how it turned out. With because even prior to my sister, the serial killer, I wouldn't have said that my style was short sentences and shorter chapters.
Really?
But once it was out there and I was getting the feedback, I was like, okay, I see it.
Yeah.
That is something that I seem to have done in this particular work. Um, and then it came to this, and I still have, I guess, shorter sentences, but the story needed, um, and even at that, I still feel like it could have been in the hands of another writer. It would have been even more indulgent than it was. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't overthink it, and I accept myself. Sometimes I set myself little challenges, and I don't mind if nobody notices those challenges. But I'll do certain things just to keep even the writing process, because I'm lazy actually as a writer. I'm really lazy, so I think that's also why my chapters are so short. Um, I try to write my own sort of anxiety about the fact that I might not get to the end of this.
Oh wow.
So I write quickly, and I try to keep myself from also being bored. So I think that's why my writing turns out the way it does. It's not that I've decided short sentences are the way to go. I've decided short chapters are the way to go. But I do kind of, what does help me is focusing on the chapter,
Right.
as opposed to necessarily thinking of the story of the book as a whole, because writing a novel is such a gangatrous task. It's really intimidating. So I just focus on the chapter, making sure that chapter is engaging and it's potent, and then I move on to the next one.
Yeah. You started saying something there where you were saying like, I felt like the story needed that this kind of prose. And I kind of just want to like dig into that a little bit more. It was that need because of the way that it spans across two or three generations of women, or was it something else, or is it the water that you begin the novel with this really gorgeous image of the sea. Like I'm just curious about what you meant by that.
I mean, I knew what I was doing was, the closest thing I could think of was, I knew it was a gothic novel. I knew it
Okay.
was there's something I think almost, at least my intention, something most fairy tale like about some aspects of it.
Yeah.
And, um, and it's just very spiritual and surreal in places. And I guess just to keep that sort of flow going.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that was my. Why apologize? Oh, thanks. Don't hold your phone. Note to self.
So yes, in trying to, even with there are these little mini chapters where sort of you get little snapshots of the other generations of the women and how the curse affected them and how they dealt with the curse. And there was a point where, I would just sort of say their name and tell their story and move on. And it was pointed out to me by my editors that nobody knew who they were in relation to my characters. They were just these people that flung into the narrative. So I was given some ideas of um, how to fix that. And nothing really connected with me. And then just all of a sudden I remembered that in the Bible, like the way that the lineage of Christ is written,
Yeah.
and it's, son of, son of, son of, and I just copied that.
Yeah.
So, and that worked out, and he kept that, because it felt right, it sounded right.
Yeah.
So I was able to lean into that. I think that also affected what the style was.
Yeah. That leads into my. I've been. That leads into my next question, which like there a lot of West African lore, right, like wrestles with this tension between legible and more colonial forms of faith, and then like a spiritual life that's grounded in juju or, um, kind of witchcraft or things, spirituality based in objects and curses, etc. And there's a lot of that in this novel. And I was just curious if you could talk about what your thinking was around that, or just like where you were when you were writing that into aspects of this novel, because everyone um, all the characters deal with faith differently, and I think something that is really fascinating to me is the fact that you kind of cribbed this form from the Bible, right? So it's even embedded in the structure, this tension, and so I just think it'd be really cool if you talk about that.
So I'll say two things about it. One, I think one thing that was that I really sort of wanted to address was the duality that I've heard some people have. They go to church on a Sunday and then on a Tuesday, they're at the door of a
Yes.
babalao. And if you don't know what a babalao is, sort of like a shaman. I liken it to like a shaman. And juju has a lot of negative connotations in Nigeria. So people who do practice it, most people do it under the cover of night. They don't announce that they're engaging with those practices. But I'm sort of fascinated about with it, and I know that I don't know, to be honest. I haven't read a lot about what the history of juju is, but I believe it's probably derived from the traditional religions, but I think it's morphed into something different. But yeah, certainly there is that tension between, at least in this novel, between Christianity and this other, and it's also about, there's a character who really, she's hoping to get her husband back, and she engages the services of a mamalao to do that. But again, she's doing it behind closed doors, and to the outside world, she's a headmistress, and she's very well put together, and she carries herself well. But then other times she's like naked, and she's doing these things to try and make sure that she can bring her husband back to her. So I was mostly interested. I don't remember what the other point I was going to make was. I know I had 2 points. I've completely blacked out on what the other one was. Um, but yeah, I think I also didn't, because people ask about uh if I believe in it,
Mm,
and um I feel like, I mean, I've just kind of I've always kept my distance. It's just something you hear about.
yeah.
Oh, I remember what the other thing I was going to
Mm-hmm.
say was, okay, so I think the interesting thing about the book, at least it's interesting to me, is that I think if the reader coming, reading this novel, depending on their background, I feel like for a European, it will read almost like pure fantasy.
Mm,
But for an African, a lot of it, I think, is going to come across as realism. And that kind of fascinates me as to how, because generational, the term generational curse
mm-hmm.
is is a very common phrase in Nigeria, for
Yeah.
example. It's not something you just, it's very, very, very common, and people do, they're like, my family has this generational curse,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to figure out ways to deal with it. So um I also, like, I'm kind of interested in to see how people from different cultures, I met a reader the other day from Latin America. She was like, yeah, but some of the themes
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
she's familiar with. So
Yeah. And I think that ties really well with what you were saying earlier about genre, right? Like describing if you,
mm,
potentially more Western audience might look at this and see fantasy and
mm,
think, well, I love,
yeah.
books about the fantastical. And then someone like me reads it and is like, oh my God, are you documenting my life? No, but I kind of just, this is getting into the nitty gritty a little bit, but I think when you were talking about the that saying of like church on a Sunday and then going to like in Ghana call it like Judea Fois on like a Tuesday. How much of that do you think is fueled by like desperation and vulnerability, which there is a lot of in this
mm,
book? And I'm
mm.
curious, like at what point you started to engage with that, as a writer.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing that I definitely considered writing about Juju
Mm-hmm.
is that it's just another faith. Like, I'm not in a position to be judgmental about it as a person of faith. It's just a different faith from mine.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, engaging with it did make me feel a little bit differently
Yeah.
about sort of my attitude towards it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I absolutely think, because the truth is that if you're looking for answers, or you've got a problem and you're looking for a solution, and the faith you've decided to follow doesn't provide you with those, I can absolutely see if somebody is between a rock and a hard place. Again, if you believe in one, if you have one way of thinking about God, or about,
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing, then it's not a massive leap to
Yeah.
go into another type of faith base.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it's just, I think the thing about Juju is that when you do hear about it,
Mm-hmm.
they're doing some really dark things. I think that's mostly the thing about it. Um but otherwise, I can see how somebody might be pushed.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that's great about this novel is that there isn't, you describe this personal distance and fascination, but it feels um, incredibly neutral, almost curious about it, right? The characters aren't necessarily judging
Mm,
the means by which they get questions answered. Like to me, the book feels really like a question that's plaguing generations of women,
mm,
and they're seeking answers. Um, I want to go back to the Bible briefly,
mm,
just to ask, because you talked about that structure that you took from the Bible, and it makes me think, like, I'm curious about the role that poetry plays in your life, and how that relates to this book at all. Like, are you someone who reads a lot? I mean, I just, from reading this book, I was like, you must read and or write
mm.
poetry, just in the way that certain sentences are constructed, and even the structure of the novel. And so I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for one, the Bible has it's beautifully written,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some really beautiful passages, but also I was a poet in a former life.
Mm,
Um, so it's tough, because now I don't know if I could, writing is a muscle, and I'm
mm-hmm.
so out of practice with writing and even reading poetry,
Mm,
that I don't even know if that's anything that I can really access the way I used to, but I actually think I started with poetry.
Yeah.
And I used to love, again, even with poetry, I used to love challenging myself with different forms. Like I do a sonnet on a Monday, and I do a sestina on a Tuesday, and I do a villanelle on a Wednesday, and I just
It's interesting you said you were lazy. It's very disciplined to me. Confusing.
poetry is shorter. It's, it doesn't take your whole life into but yes, I used to just, and it got to a point where I ran out of forms, and I started searching for new form. And then I think at some point, this is really audacious of me, but I made a form of,
Incredible.
yeah, I was like, I've run out
A
of
thing
them,
lazy
I'm gonna
people
just
do, I've heard. Yeah.
I'm just gonna make my own. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed. So I think it's what it taught me, what poetry taught me, was to have an ear for rhythm and for flow. And yeah.
Yeah, I think especially the way that Monifa talks is, to me, very poetic. Just the she's very sharp. She's a very sharp-tongued character. But her responses are, there's a rhythm to it, especially if you just, read the dialogue. So another question I had has to do with motherhood, because I was really struck by the descriptions of motherhood in this book. They're so vivid and often heartbreaking, and there's this almost haunting sense of isolation. And so I'm wondering, and I know that you are a mother, and so I'm just wondering, like, in the years between your first and second novel, like how that transition impacted your relationship to language and your craft, and how that shows up in the novel.
So I'm always getting like tempted to, because I've been asked so much about how motherhood has affected, especially this. No, I don't mean it as a, but I'm just saying that, and I feel like people want to hear that it's changed my writing. It's changed me. But when I started writing this, I was pregnant, and then at some point I had her, and it gets very blurry after that. Like I was in survival. Oh, my cousin was there for like the beginning of it. It was hectic. So, I don't feel like I had an opportunity to draw on that, but I am a daughter, and just, I've seen how my relationship with my mother has changed, but also how, she does some things out of love that to me don't always feel, I don't receive as love at the time. I might look back on it and be like, okay, fair enough. Well, okay, I see what was going on there. But at the time, like, what is this woman? What is wrong with her? So, that was, and aunties as well who have done things out of love that I'm like, why? Actually, I remember once Nee and I, we wanted to go, I don't know if it was clubbing or a house party. I feel it was probably a house party back in the day. And we wanted to go to a house party, and we had finally gotten permission to go. And it was like, maybe we had gotten like a 9 p.m. curfew or something. And we were almost out the door when my aunt arrives, and, she finds out what's going on, and she starts going on about how her pastor, he can't sleep when his kids go out, and she changed the whole vibe. So they changed our curfew from like 9 to like 7, and we were still in the house. It was like 6, so it was basically a go out, put your foot on the ground and then start heading, and there was nothing we could say. But yeah, I've been surrounded by, I think, a lot of women who were really fierce and really forceful and really invasive. So I have a lot to draw on as far as that.
Yeah. Did you ever get the I got this a lot when I was a kid. I would be like, oh, I want to go out, and my mom would be like, I had a dream. So
No,
I had a dream, I had a vision.
Let me tell you how wild my parents got about us and going out. So this was my sister and I, and again, they had agreed to let us go out, and then we were driving by now, so we were in our 20s. So then all of a sudden they decided, you know what, it's not safe for you guys to drive out and drive back, that late. So we're gonna get you an Uber we didn't have Ubers yet, but a taxi driver to come take you to the event, bring you back or whatever. So we're like, fine, let's do that. Then he comes, and then they realize actually they don't trust this guy.
Oh.
They don't know this guy. So instead, they said, okay, we should drive, but he should drive behind us.
Oh, naturally,
Yeah.
yes.
So like a convoy, and it was so ridiculous because I was like, if something were to happen, this guy would just drive off.
yeah.
Like he has no loyalty to us, but it gave them a measure of peace.
Yeah, yeah. When you were talking about being a daughter and your relationship to your mother and love, I actually started thinking, which I hadn't thought about before, but earlier I said that your books to me are connected by secrets, but I also think that they're connected by love and your investigations of how love kind of pushes you to a form of desperation, which is not very different from the, women being drawn um to juju. And I'm just curious what you think of that. Like, is that something that you're conscious of, or is that one of those questions that a reader asks a writer and they're like, I don't know, bro?
When I was creating Ebru, I really struggled with. I was so afraid people wouldn't be able to empathize with her, or would find her POV like to be the skip over point of view. But I really empathize with her because I think that she did a lot of things that she shouldn't have done. She made a lot of mistakes, but it was born of love and fear. And I think she was willing to sacrifice her daughter's love for her, or her relationship with her daughter, so far as her daughter was okay, so far
Right.
as her daughter made it.
Right.
And I don't think that's unique to her. I think a lot of mothers make that choice that, you know what, it's okay if you hate me so far as you make it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely was interested in the complexity of that relationship
Yeah.
sometimes.
And it's something you explore in My Sister the Serial Killer too, but more on the sister level, right? Like there's um a kind of love and desperation fuels the principal character's ability to keep this secret. So I just thought that was interesting. Yeah. I'm gonna ask about the men in the novel. Because in here in my notes I wrote, the men in this novel feel more fully realized. Because they're not that they weren't in My Sister the Serial Killer, but they are sort of the objects of murder, I might say. They're victims in a sense. But here they're much more complicated, more rounded out, and I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about your relationship to the men in these novels, especially which of them, I'm curious, ended up having the loudest voice. Like, how conscious were these decisions?
I really wanted Golden Boy to be. I know he makes mistakes, but I
Yeah.
wanted him to be. I wanted people to love the two of them
Yeah.
together, Monifa and Golden Boy.
Maybe we should explain who they are to each other briefly, without spoiling. Challenge.
Yeah, so Golden Boy is the man of Monifa's dreams, I guess. she she decides he's the one that she's gonna love, and he's the one that she's gonna break the curse with. And he's very, because she's quite Monifa's streets. I think she's quite she's bold, she's confident, she's flirty, she's uh she's her own person. But Golden Boy is far more reserved, comes from a very wealthy conservative family, and he's much more innocent than she is in some ways. And I just kind of loved them together. But some people have told me they don't like him.
Oh, well.
Yeah, they think he's a mama's boy.
Well.
But yeah, it's
yeah, he is. I mean, I'm not gonna disagree.
I think, yeah. I mean, okay. I'm not gonna defend, like, he did some things he shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
But yes, I really it was very important to me that there were parts of him that were desirable.
Yeah.
And the same for Zubi, who's another character's love interest. And I wanted the men to be, I don't think I wish I had spent a little more time with Monifa's brother. She does have a brother. There is a guy in the house.
There is a man in the house.
I wish I had spent a little bit more time with him, but I think even he, I feel like you get to towards the end sort of see the how the environment affected him.
Yeah, and I don't, I think the way that you wrote him also at the end makes the revelations that much more like impactful, because he finally like, sort of like speaks out in a very literal sense, and I don't know, I think that really worked for me. Well, I could ask you 1 million questions till the end of time, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Am I handing the mic over or? Oh, fab. You don't get a mic. But if anyone has any questions, I mean, well, first, maybe a round of applause. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And now, does anyone have any questions? Don't be shy.
Hi.
I have two questions, but I'll start with the first. I was curious with the way the book started, and this is just me being very curious. With Shango, I really thought that was like like the spirit. Was that intentional, introducing him that way, and then us realizing who he was later on?
Yeah, actually, an aunt of mine gave me feedback. She said she burst out laughing when she realized what, yeah, because she was like the whole time she thought there was a god in the house with them. But yeah, I kind of, I don't know if I think initially I just wanted him to be like this hulking figure that's like moving around and like that's really bothering Ebu because I mean she has her guilt and she doesn't like the dog anyway and so I don't know if I thought as far as I don't think I thought people are gonna think he's a god, but I definitely wanted him to be a presence that was really bothering her and that was he's a big black and that was just in the shadows constantly watching her. I definitely wanted that vibe. What was your second question?
I can have somebody else go as well.
No, seize the moment. Yeah.
So I'm not done with the book yet, but you mentioned Monica and Golden Boy or Kalu and Zubi and his love interest. Um, there's this like tribal, like Yoruba and Igbo, and I wonder if you were very like why you chose those two tribes, and if that was like if there's a thread there that maybe is explored more at the end, or
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah. I think okay, so I think the thing about Nigeria is that we've got over like 300 tribes and um most people like marry at this stage. I think people are mostly marrying into, but you still have each tribe still has its stereotypes. And back in the day, uh there were a lot of like, don't marry this tribe or don't this tribe do this and this tribe do that. And some people I think still feel that way, but Igbo and Yoruba, in my opinion, they're the ones that probably mixed the most. But there's still like some tension between the two tribes, I guess, because of the civil war and all of that. So yeah, that's partly why I wanted to use those two.
I'm looking at all of you. Like, you must have burning questions.
Hi.
So I was also curious why you decided to frame the curse as a curse of lovelessness. You could have been grew up on a diet of Nollywood movies, but curse is usually about money or barrenness, which is often a more powerful thing for women. So why did you decide to frame it in the sense of romance, which just thinking about my African mothers and women I know, it doesn't seem to be very important for African women of a certain generation romance. And marriage is more utilitarian. So I wanted to understand why you focus on just love, which seems like a more for African women of a certain generation, it's kind of trivial in the grand scheme of what marriage is supposed to be.
Well, I think for one, I feel like I'm generally quite interested in male female dynamics and the power play there. And even if you say love isn't as essential, it is still vital for stability and status in that society. So it might not, and I don't think all the women in that family were looking for love. Some of them just wanted a husband. But yeah, I absolutely agree that for some generations, um, romantic love wasn't essential, but certainly having a husband was, in order to have a family and in order to have a foundation. And that's what I think for a lot of the women in this, some of them do desire love. Um, Kemi is looking for a payday. um, so it depends on which character specifically you're talking about. But I think more than anything, it was just that they were experiencing a lot of brokenness. And also, when you know that you can't have something, it's always at the back of your mind that for some reason you don't have access to this thing. And that makes you desire it all the more. So that's sort of what I was going for with that.
Yeah, it kind of alters their relationship to romance too. Like for the characters who are who have the most heartbreaking relationship to the curse, I feel like it's because they deeply believe in romance to a certain degree, right? They're hopeless romantics. I'm actually curious, like, if you do you read a lot of romance or
I don't read that much romance,
you
but I
just want
definitely
write it.
I definitely gained a whole new respect for romance writers with this because it was hard. And it kind of made me curious about what separates one romantic couple from another. Why does couple A survive centuries and couple B we forget about the moment we close the book? It's like I don't know how how it's done, because at the end of the day, for majority of romance stories, it is boy meets girl, uh boy likes girl or hates girl, girl likes boy or hates boy, conflict, they end up together. Or they don't. And that's it. That's what you have at and yet some people really manage to pull something quite beautiful from that. And also actually to the question about the women and marriage, there's a line in this book where it says, we don't know what a woman will become until she marries. And that's something that I heard. It's not something I made up. And it was from a grandma. She's passed now, God rest her soul. But not my grandma, somebody else's grandma. And I remember being so annoyed because it was my sister's graduation. And I remember thinking, and she said it in relation to my sister. And I remember thinking, like, why is that relevant? What, why are you bringing it up? But since then, I feel like I've seen the truth of it, but I don't think it just applies to women. I think it applies to men as well. Whoever you decide to tie your destiny to, whoever you decide to call your partner, can greatly affect whether you influence whether you succeed or fail. And whatever it is you're trying to do. Some people don't like to see their partners flourish or are not creating a conducive environment for a person to flourish or be who they were destined to be. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily just about love, but I am a bit of a romantic myself, I think. So there's a lot of that in it.
Yeah. I realized I didn't ask you about, and sorry, if anyone else has a question, definitely feel free to jump in. But I didn't ask you about, you started this conversation by telling us that you were interested in reincarnation. And I'm realizing that I didn't press you on that, and I'm really
not that interested. It wasn't enough to I was interested in it as a it's weird. I wasn't interested in I don't know how to explain it. I was interested in the effects of being thought you were a reincarnate, like how that would affect, how that would influence the choices you made or what you were able to make, or how that affected people's behavior towards you. I wasn't drawn to reincarnation in and of itself.
Right. More like what is the baggage of history.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I do have a question.
Amazing.
I'm curious about the title of the book because you made a very fascinating point that I in just seeing the covers and stuff about to the Western audience they would see this as a fantasy book with a book like this, but to the African audience it's like ooh, it's like a bit woo woo. How do you balance that in your writing when you know that your book is bound to be here in Brooklyn Heights, New York, and also somewhere in Lagos someday? Like, how do you balance making sure that the ideas that you want to convey cut across um, both perspectives?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question, but I don't know that I really balanced it. I just did what felt right, and then the cards would fall where they may. But um, and I already know, like, I've already gotten some feedback from, like, you know, like, I know there's a friend of an aunt of mine who said, oh, she can't read this book, that it's weird. Or so I already know there will be some Nigerians that distance themselves from it
Yeah.
just by virtue of what they think it is. But one thing that I did think about is when we were trying to pick the title at some point, one of the suggestions was A Curse on All Your Daughters, which I thought was a beautiful title, but my response was, no African will buy this
Yeah,
book.
it does actually sound like a curse.
I was like, you're gonna lose me a whole demographic with that. So Cursed Daughters was like our compromise.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm good save there.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, yeah.
When you're writing your book, do you give yourself daily goals like how many pages to write? And when you're doing it, how do you know when you're at the end when the book is done? Do you do it, or does your editor do it, or you guys collaborate?
I give myself word count goals, and I don't care how, because I might not be able to reach that goal in one sitting, but I will. If I can't do it in one sitting, I'll try and do it in little pockets throughout the day. I'm still a person who, when I get serious about it, if I don't have access to my laptop, I'll write on my iPad. If I don't have access to that, I'll write on my phone. But I must reach that word count for the day, otherwise I start to lose momentum. And I've already said I'm terrified of losing momentum. As for when I know it's done, um, I don't know. I always just know it's done. Because I'm actually not great at endings. So, it's a bit of a fiddly bit for me, but I'll know that I've done what I'm supposed to do. And you kind of, because of the story that you're telling as well. With My Sister's Serial Killer, even though, like, I guess a lot of people consider it an open-ended ending, but to me it wasn't, because what it was about was Korede's internal journey and her struggle with, you know, loving her sister, but also having to face what and who her sister was. So the minute she made that choice, the story ended. It didn't matter whether or not they were still killing or not killing. What mattered was that she had made that choice. And that's what the story is. So I think if you know what the story is that you're telling, you'll know when you've told it.
Yeah. Which is interesting because you said you typically don't start with knowing the plot, so it sounds like you kind of feel your way through.
Yes, I don't. Yeah, but I think there's a point with My Sister's Serial Killer, like midway through, I was like, I know what's gonna happen. Because by then I knew who she was. I knew what choice she would make. I knew she would always choose her sister. No matter how much, like, fussing she did on the way, she would always choose her sister, because she had always chosen her sister. And I mean, once you accept the first murder, like, you've already crossed that line. So, and she didn't really do anything beyond that. So once I had sort of come to terms with that, it's like, okay. You spoke about a twist when we were talking privately, and I didn't know which one you were talking about, but there was one in particular that, again, I didn't know when, because when I started writing it starts with Monife's death. Um, and, but I didn't know what had triggered her death when I started it. I didn't know what exactly had triggered it. And then at some point I knew. And I can't tell you, I feel like writing is a kind of magic that just, it's sort of alchemy, and the word, it just comes as it comes. So, but once it came to me, I'm not saying I did spend time thinking, what is it? This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like it'll push her to do it. But once I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is perfect. And then I was able to move on from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it's almost like the characters will tell you, they speak to you. Well, thank you so much, Oyin, for being here. This has been a really lovely conversation.
I enjoyed myself.
Yeah, this is fabulous. And thank you all for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Lovia, for moderating. Thank you, Oyinkan, for celebrating this with us.
Yeah.
So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do our signing line, which is gonna be very fun. Where my coworker is pointing, that is where she will be signing. We're gonna line up down the middle aisle. If you guys could please pick up all of your belongings, because we're gonna turn this place back to a bookstore very quickly. Yeah, thanks for coming. Have a good night. We also have copies available at the front of purchase, and you can buy more copies in the link in the description. Thank you.
Standing together. Oh, we're prematurely posing. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes. You sure you're not a content creator?